Hi. The last of these videos that we produced, Josh and I talked about why we prefer utilizing indexed ETFs to build our portfolios. And this week, we'd like to expand on that a bit by delving a little bit deeper into the potentiality of index ETFs and how we manage portfolios, perhaps more dynamically than what some clients and certainly prospects might think.
Yeah, and I think much of that really gets down to the fact that the ETF market has expanded exponentially in the last decade or so. So the availability of different options within the ETF space is much greater than it used to be. So I think when people think about indexed ETFs or index mutual funds, they often think, well, it's the S&P 500 or it's some other very large, broad index. But at this point, the technology has evolved to the point where you can dial your exposure into a given theme. So if you want to own high dividend paying stocks, there's ETFs for that. If you want to own dividend growth stocks, there's ETFs for that. There's sector ETFs, right? So the idea here is just to drill a little bit more deeply into our process around using that technology to build portfolios.
We had a conversation with a new client, and the perception was that because we're using indexed ETFs, so we're just 100% passive, and we just ended up owning the market. And the point that Josh was making is that with the evolution of the ETF market, there are so many options available that you can reflect market biases or opinions about the economy into a portfolio. And we touched on these briefly a couple of weeks ago, but some of the broader categories might be growth, the growth-oriented portions of the stock market versus the value-oriented. Well, what do those two things mean? To stereotype a bit, the growth side is generally reflected in names like Apple and Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, and so forth. And the value side might be better represented by companies like Procter and Gamble or some of the oil companies, retailers and so forth, the auto companies. So you get a feel for the differentiation just across that spectrum.
Yeah, so when we think about how to build a portfolio, what we'll start with is where do we want to be from a top-down standpoint? What are our views today and how do we want those implemented in a portfolio? And if we want to be overweight value, for example, that's the starting point to think about which ETFs we should have more of in our portfolios. Now, to be clear, we're not ever going to completely eliminate any part of the market. So we're not taking large swings in either direction, but we do want to tilt the portfolio based upon the views that we have. So what we've been able to do over time is develop a set of ETFs that we can go to that are all very low fee, very highly diversified within their space of the market. And we can put a portfolio together based on the weightings of those ETFs and use those weightings to tilt the portfolio toward whichever theme we want to favor at that given point. So in this case, again, value, we would buy ETFs that were overweight the sectors that Frank just mentioned relative to the value part of the market.
So the point that Josh was making is that we're pursuing a dynamic asset allocation strategy here. We're not trying to time the market. We're not, as Josh said, either taking big swings in or out of specific sectors, but we do want to bias portfolio exposures to reflect our views to the economy, to the valuation of certain sectors. And that was, just as an example, an incredibly important decision we made at the end of 2021 was underweighting the technology sectors that we believed were overvalued. Fine companies, but the price of the stock relative to the earnings and the earnings potential of the stocks we felt were overblown.
And I think the other thing just to come back to is that we've talked about this in prior videos. We believe strongly in the diversification element here. So again, it's not just about picking a given name within the growth part of the market or in the value part of the market. We want to own the whole basket. It's just about owning that theme and owning it in a diversified, very low fee way across the entire market. So, I mean, again, it's kind of top-down portfolio construction with low-fee ETFs that allow us to target a specific element in the market that we want to favor in portfolios at a given point in time.
We've emphasized kind of growth versus value sectors as an example, but there are so many more. Josh referenced industry sectors. Again, with the evolution of the ETF market, there are ETFs that own a broad number of names, but are specific to healthcare or consumer staples, technology, which we've touched on, banking, real estate, and so on. There are well over 3,000 indexed ETFs in the market today, which gives you an idea of, and we wouldn't use the majority of those because of the fees or the lack of diversification. But those that we do, there's a broad menu of things that we can use. Another interesting sector decision is domestic versus non-domestic. There are similar decisions we can make on the fixed income side as well, which increase or decrease your credit exposure, your exposure to corporate bonds, mortgage bonds, the overall maturity or duration of the portfolio. They're longer and shorter. And again, so we can react to valuation metrics there, as well as potential changes in interest rates going forward. The point we really wanted to make today, I hope we have, which is just because we're using indexed ETFs to build portfolios does not mean it's a purely indexed passive strategy for each client. Each client gets a solution specific to them and specific to Josh's and my views to the marketplace.